The velvet box scrapes across the white linen and lands in front of my sister, and my father doesn't even glance my way when he does it. Everyone at the table claps. Crystal glasses clink. Giselle shrieks and covers her mouth with both hands like she's just been handed an Oscar instead of a deed. Gavin leans over her shoulder to peek inside, and I watch his eyebrows lift when he reads the paperwork. A $20 million waterfront estate in Palm Beach, 4 bedrooms facing the intracoastal, a private dock rated for a 60-foot yacht. Outside the tall windows behind him, the last of the daylight is draining off the Elk Mountains, turning the snow the particular shade of blue it only holds for about 10 minutes before full dark sets in. A view most people in this room paid a small fortune to watch from a heated chair with a glass of Bordeaux in hand. My father built his fortune on defense logistics contracts and real estate deals. And tonight, at this private dining room in the Silvermount Lodge above Aspen, he's decided the best way to celebrate Giselle's engagement is to hand her a piece of Florida coastline like it's a party favor. I sit at the far end of the mahogany table, in my Army service uniform, the only person in the room not holding a champagne flute. The heat from the stone fireplace doesn't reach this end. Neither does my father's attention, most nights. But tonight he finds a reason to look at me, and it isn't a good one. His eyes land on the gold shield pinned above my ribbons, military police. He sets down his scotch, and something in his face shifts from indifferent to amused, the particular amusement of a man who has an audience of 23 guests and decides I'm about to be the evening's entertainment. "You're just traffic duty, Olivia." He says it loud enough that conversations around the table stop. You write parking tickets at the gate while Gavin and Giselle secure the real legacy of this family. Gavin laughs into his scotch, a 30-year single malt he's been nursing since the appetizer course. Somewhere down the table, a woman in emerald earrings smiles the way people smile when they're not sure if they're allowed to. I could tell my father that I graduated top of my class in forensic accounting before I ever put on a uniform. I could tell him I've run internal investigations that saved the Army more money in a single fiscal year than his entire real estate portfolio is worth. I could tell him a lot of things. Instead, I touch the edge of my badge, feel the cool metal under my fingertip, and I pick up my water glass instead of my pride. For a moment, nobody moves. Even the string quartet in the corner seems to hold its bow mid-stroke. I feel the old, familiar heat climb up the back of my neck. The same heat I used to feel at 15, standing in this same kind of room, while my father explained to some business associate why his younger daughter was the pretty one, and I was the practical one, as if practicality were a consolation prize instead of the thing that's kept 12,000 soldiers safe under my command. I let the heat pass through me instead of letting it out. It's a skill I learned the hard way, in rooms far less comfortable than this one, and it's never failed me yet. Dignity isn't bought, Father, I say. It's earned. The room goes quiet for exactly as long as it takes my father to wave his hand, dismissing me the way he'd dismiss a waiter who brought the wrong wine. Conversation resumes. Giselle admires her deed, tilting it so the firelight catches the embossed seal. Gavin refills his scotch. Nobody at that table looks at me again for the rest of the night, which is, in its own way, a mercy. I didn't grow up planning to disappoint my father. I grew up in a house where dinner conversation was measured in deal sizes and square footage, where my mother, Eleanor, used to squeeze my hand under the table whenever Harrison got like this. A silent code between the two of us that meant, let it go, we'll talk in the car. She's been gone 6 years now. There's no hand to squeeze anymore. Just me, a water glass, and a badge he thinks is a costume. I chose the Army the year after she died, against every word of advice my father offered, which mostly amounted to, "You're throwing away a Rutherford's future to write speeding tickets." He never asked what a provost marshal actually does. Never asked about the 18 months I spent training in forensic auditing and criminal investigations. Never asked about the internal fraud case I closed in my first command that saved the Army $11 million in a single audit cycle. He decided who I was before I ever put on the uniform, and nothing I've done since has moved that decision an inch. I finish my water. I don't order the wine. Somewhere down the table, my father is already telling Gavin's father about a logistics contract they're expecting to finalize within the month, his voice loud and easy now that the unpleasant daughter has gone quiet again. I watch him laugh, watch the firelight catch the gold of his cufflinks, and I think, not for the first time, that a man who measures his family in dollar signs eventually forgets that some of us were never for sale. By the end of the year, the same badge he just called a joke in front of 23 guests will be the only thing standing between his company and a courtroom. I don't know that yet. Nobody at that table does. All I know, sitting at the cold end of a dinner my own family paid for, is that I'm done letting him decide what my life is worth. I finish the evening quietly, the way I finish most evenings in this family, and by the time the driver takes me back down the mountain to the small rental cabin I booked for myself instead of staying in Harrison's suite. Not revenge. Not yet. Just a line I'm not going to let him cross again, whatever it costs me to hold it. Comment A if you'd have snapped back at him right there in front of everyone. Comment B if you'd have done exactly what I did, stayed calm, and let the badge speak for itself when the moment actually mattered. I'll tell you which one I chose by the end. I fly out the next morning, first class, Denver to the East Coast, seat 2C on a red-eye I chose specifically because it would get me to Joint Base Vanguard. Before anyone in my family woke up to ask more questions. Vanguard is a classified, multi-billion-dollar joint force logistics and defense installation, the kind of posting most officers spend a career hoping to earn. And I've earned it. 11 years of postings nobody at that dinner table could name. Investigations nobody at that table ever asked about. 2 combat deployments my father found out about secondhand, months after I'd already come home. I settle into the seat, order black coffee instead of champagne, and I let myself feel, for about 40 minutes, like the version of my life that has nothing to do with Harrison Rutherford at all. That lasts until Gavin Harrington drops into 2A with a flute of champagne already sweating in his hand. Small world, Major. He says my rank the way some men say his job title they think is beneath them. Like, it's a costume I put on for fun. Harrington Defense owns the logistics software running Vanguard's entire supply chain. I'm headed there myself to close a $450 million contract. Vanguard's basically my playground now. He takes a slow sip, watching me over the rim of the glass the way a man watches something he expects to flinch. Don't get in my way at the gate with your little traffic. Whistle. I could ask him what he means by playground. I could ask him whether he's ever actually read the terms of a Department of Defense logistics contract, or whether Harrington Defense's legal team just hands him talking points to repeat at parties. Instead, I look at him for a long moment, the way I'd look at a financial statement that doesn't balance, because overconfidence with nothing solid underneath it always has the same texture, whether it's coming from a spreadsheet or a man in a $2,000 suit. Every system has a vulnerability, Gavin, I say, keeping my voice as flat and unhurried as the flight itself. Arrogance is usually the first one. He laughs it off, loud, easy, performing for nobody in particular since the seats around us are mostly asleep. But I catch the half second where his jaw tightens before the sound comes out, a flicker most people would miss. I've built a career on noticing what people try to hide in the half second after they've been caught off guard, and Gavin Harrington, for all his Aston Martin and his Harrington Defense business cards, hides it about as well as a man wearing his father-in-law's confidence like a rented tuxedo. He keeps talking anyway, the way men like him usually do once they've decided a silence is theirs to fill. He tells me about the 4-bedroom penthouse he and Giselle are closing on in Alexandria, close enough to the Pentagon that he can walk into any meeting he wants, a detail he offers like it's a threat instead of a real estate listing. He tells me Harrington Defense's board just approved a stock buyback on the strength of the Vanguard contract alone, months before it's even signed, because apparently nobody on that board thought to ask what happens to a company's valuation if the contract falls through. I file all of it away without comment, the way I file away everything useful that people volunteer while they're busy trying to impress someone they've already decided. Doesn't matter. We land a little after 10 in the morning. A driver in a black suit is waiting for him at baggage claim with a sign that reads Harrington Defense Systems. I take a government sedan alone, and somewhere around the second checkpoint into Vanguard's outer perimeter, badge scanned, retinas confirmed, credentials cross-referenced against a personnel file that took the Pentagon 6 weeks to finalize. I stop thinking about him entirely. I have a base to run, 12,000 personnel under my security authority, and a command staff waiting to brief me on a facility I intend to know better than anyone who's ever tried to underestimate it. My first briefing runs 3 hours longer than scheduled, mostly because I ask questions my predecessor's staff clearly aren't used to being asked. Who authorizes emergency override codes? How often clearance logs get independently audited? Which vendors have standing access to the inner logistics ring without an escort? Half the room seems mildly annoyed by the thoroughness. The other half, I notice, seems relieved. The particular relief of people who've been quietly worried about gaps nobody in leadership wanted to hear about. By the end of that first day, I've already decided this is a base worth taking seriously, in every sense of the word. The Operations and Security Command Center at Vanguard isn't the kind of room civilians picture when they hear the word base. It's 3 stories of glass and steel, monitors tracking global defense supply chains in real time, servers cooled to 62 degrees, the kind of place where a single keystroke moves cargo worth more than most small countries' GDP. It's mine now. I walk it on my first morning as base provost marshal at 6:14 in the morning, before most of my staff has poured their first coffee. Because I've never once in my career trusted a system, I haven't personally audited myself, credentials or no credentials. For the first 2 weeks, Vanguard runs the way a well-oiled base is supposed to run. Clean logs, predictable patterns, the kind of quiet competence that lets a commander sleep at night. Then I open the logistics clearance database on a Tuesday afternoon and start running the routine internal review I run at every new post, the kind of forensic housekeeping most incoming officers skip because it's tedious and usually turns up nothing but a misfiled invoice or a supply sergeant padding his overtime. I approach it the same way I approach every audit. Start wide, narrow gradually, never assume the first anomaly is the only one. I pull 12 months of vendor payment records into a spreadsheet that eventually swells past 4,000 line items, cross-referencing invoice dates against shipping confirmations, confirmation numbers against the physical inspection logs kept by the gate crews themselves. Most of it checks out clean, the way most of any large organization's paperwork does. It's the exceptions that matter, and by the second day of the review, the exceptions have started clustering in a pattern too specific to be random. This isn't that. I find duplicate vendor billings first. The same shipment of secure communications hardware invoiced twice, 11 days apart, to 2 different cost centers, a pattern too clean to be an accident and too sloppy to be anything but greed. Then backdated shipping manifests, dated to make cargo appear to have cleared inspection on days when the inspection queue shows 0 recorded activity. Then the clearance bypasses, 41 of them across 14 months, each authorized under an emergency override code that's supposed to require 2 command signatures, and in every single instance carries only 1. Every red flag transaction traces back to the same vendor, Harrington Defense Systems. When I follow the domestic payout chain, a shell company processing the local disbursements, routing money through 3 states before it lands anywhere traceable by a standard audit, I find a name on the incorporation paperwork that stops my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. Falcon Ridge Sourcing LLC, Rutherford. I run the search again, twice, half hoping I've made an error somewhere in the query, a misfiled EIN, a coincidence of names. Anything that would let this be someone else's fraud and not my own family's. I pull the original incorporation filing myself instead of trusting the summary, cross-reference the registered address against a property record, and watch it match. Line for line, a modest office suite 2 floors below my father's actual headquarters in Richmond. The kind of address that exists purely so nobody looking casually would ever connect it to Rutherford Group at all. It's careful work. It's the kind of careful that only comes from someone who's done this before, more than once, and never once been caught doing it. I sit with that for a long time. The glow of the monitor the only light in my office at 9:40 that night, my staff long gone home. $17.3 million in duplicate billings over 14 months. 212 backdated manifests. 41 unauthorized clearance bypasses. Every figure I add to the tally feels like another confirmation of something I've suspected about my father for years without ever having proof of it. That the man who taught me love comes itemized. Was, underneath all of it, running his own family the exact same way he ran his fraudulent shell company. Extract what's useful, discard what isn't, and never once ask what it costs the people on the other end of the ledger. A base my own father's company has been quietly bleeding for over a year, while he sat across a dinner table from me and called my badge a joke in front of 23 guests. My family isn't merely comfortable. They're actively defrauding the United States military. And they've been careful enough, arrogant enough, that nobody thought to look until the daughter they dismissed, as traffic duty, was handed the keys to look harder than anyone ever had. I don't call him. I don't call anyone that night. I close the file, lock my terminal, and drive home to an empty set of government quarters, where I sit at a kitchen table that's never once had a family, dinner at it, and think about my mother's hand under the table at Silvermount, and what she'd say if she could see this spreadsheet glowing on my laptop. Giselle's bridal shower happens 3 weeks later, on a 150-foot yacht called the Aurelia, docked at Newport Beach under a sky so clear it almost feels like a rebuke. I almost don't go. I go anyway, because my mother loved these glittering, ridiculous family events, and some part of me still shows up for her, even when she isn't here to notice whether I did. I arrive in the one civilian dress I own that still fits the occasion, feeling distinctly out of place among women, discussing seating charts and flower arrangements as though they were matters of national security, and I find myself scanning the deck out of old habit. Exits, sightlines, who's watching whom. The same way I'd assess any unfamiliar space, ceremonial or otherwise. I stay 40 minutes. Long enough for champagne toasts, a string quartet playing something written specifically to be pleasant and forgettable, and Giselle modeling a wedding dress sketch to a circle of women I've never met. I'm heading for the gangway when my father and Gavin intercept me on the teak deck, away from the socialites, close enough to the railing that the wind off the water nearly takes the document out of my father's hand before he manages to press it into mine. It's a legal waiver. My signature, my security clearance, and authorization to bypass the upcoming cargo inspections on 3 incoming Harrington Defense shipments at Vanguard, effective immediately. It's family business, Olivia, my father says, in the tone he uses when he means, do exactly what I want and don't make me repeat myself. I hand it back without fully opening it. I don't need to read it. I've had my staff quietly flagging every Harrington manifest for the last 19 days, and I already know precisely what's inside those 3 shipments, down to the line item. I don't do that, I say. The aristocratic composure cracks off my father's face like a coat of paint peeling in the sun. You ungrateful girl, I built this family standing from nothing, and you think you get to say no to me? His voice climbs. Enough that a few heads turn near the champagne table, glasses paused halfway to lips. Sign the waiver, Olivia, or I promise you, 1 phone call, and your commission is stripped down to nothing. You'll be standing at that gate with no badge at all. Gavin watches with his arms crossed, amused, the way a man watches a tennis match he's already bet on and already assumes he's won. Behind him, through the yacht's open salon doors, I can see Giselle laughing at something one of her bridesmaids said, utterly unaware that 20 feet away, her father and her fiancé are threatening to end her sister's career over a piece of paper. Part of me wants to walk over and tell her everything right there on the spot. The duplicate billings, the shell company, all $17 million of it. I don't. Not yet. Not until I understand how deep it actually goes, and not until I'm certain she isn't standing closer to the fire than she realizes. I look at the waiver one more time, then at my father, really at him. At the man who taught me that love in this family always came itemized, receipts included. I don't water rotten roots, father, I say. Keep your paper. I'll keep my oath. I walk off that yacht at 4:52 in the afternoon and don't look back at the deck. Somewhere behind me, I hear Giselle asking what's wrong, and I hear my father tell her it's nothing, just Olivia being difficult again. He has no idea how right he is, or how differently that word is about to start meaning something for both of us. I don't confront him again after the yacht. I do something more useful. I place a secure call to a woman I trained alongside a decade ago, now a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division out of the Washington field office, Renata Cole, and I lay the $17 million spreadsheet in front of her the way I'd lay evidence in front of anyone I actually trusted with it. You understand what you're handing me, Renata says over a secure line, her voice careful in a way I recognize from every serious case I've ever worked. This isn't a base infraction, Olivia. This is a federal fraud case with your father's own name on the incorporation documents. Once I open this, there's no version where it stays quiet, and there's no version where it stays contained to just him. You need to be certain. I know exactly what I'm handing you, I say. I've been certain since the night I found the second manifest. The other person I bring in is General Alistair Prescott, 4 stars, commander of the Joint Logistics and Security Command, a man whose approval on anything typically moves at the speed of the Pentagon, and not an inch faster, except when it comes to fraud inside his own supply chain, where I learn very quickly that he moves like someone who's been waiting years for a reason. He's the one who taught me, back when I was a captain running my first internal audit, that a security posture is only as strong as the person willing to look at numbers nobody wants looked at. I still remember the exact case that taught me that sentence under his command. A maintenance contractor, padding fuel, receipts by a few $100s a month, small enough that 3 previous auditors had waved it through as rounding error. Prescott made me chase it anyway, for 6 weeks, until it unraveled into a scheme worth close to $2 million. The people who think small fraud isn't worth your time, he told me then, are usually the same people who've never had to explain to Congress why it grew. I never forgot it. It's the exact instinct that made me keep pulling the thread on Falcon Ridge sourcing, instead of writing it off as an accounting error. And it's the reason he reads my findings in 11 minutes, in total silence. And when he finally looks up from the folder, there's nothing in his face but a kind of grim respect I've earned from very few people in my life. "You've built an airtight case, Major," he says. "Keep building it." Quietly. For the next several weeks, I become someone my father believes he understands. Quiet, compliant, apparently still weighing his ultimatum, still deciding whether family loyalty outweighs whatever principle I claim to have on that yacht. I let him believe it. I let Gavin believe his $450 million contract is sailing towards signature without friction of any kind. Meanwhile, every encrypted wire transfer between Falcon Ridge Sourcing and Harrington Defense gets logged. Every phone call between my father and Gavin's corporate counsel gets timestamped into a file that grows heavier by the day, page by page, wire by wire. Renata flies out to Vanguard twice that month, both times under a cover story about a routine-based security review, both times carrying a laptop bag that never leaves her side. We work out of the secure federal workspace attached to my office, reinforced glass, a server rack humming behind us like a second heartbeat. And she teaches me things about tracing shell companies that 11 years of Army investigations never had reason to cover. She shows me how to follow money through layered LLCs, the way I'd follow a supply chain through a dozen subcontractors, one transfer at a time, never assuming the trail ends where it looks like it ends. Falcon Ridge Sourcing, it turns out, isn't the only entity my father set up to move money quietly. There's a second one, registered in Delaware under a cousin's maiden name, that's been funneling a percentage of every fraudulent Harrington payout into an account that eventually, through 4 more transfers, lands in a trust with Giselle's name on it. My sister has no idea. I check carefully 3 separate times, because some things I need to be sure of before I let myself believe them. She doesn't know. Whatever she isn't a co-conspirator, just another person my father decided to use without asking. I spend my evenings that month the way I spent most evenings before all of this started, running the reviewing personnel files, walking the perimeter at odd hours because a provost marshal who never sees her own gates in person is a provost marshal waiting to be surprised. Except now every one of those evenings ends the same way, at my kitchen table, cross-referencing timestamps against wire confirmations until the numbers stop looking like numbers and start looking like a shape. General Prescott checks in every Friday at exactly 1700 hours, never longer than 6 minutes. Always the same question. Anything that changes the timeline. Some weeks the answer is no. Some weeks it's a dollar figure that makes even his voice go quiet on the other end of the line. By the middle of the month, Renata's file has grown from a spreadsheet into something closer to a small library. Sworn statements from 2 junior Harrington Defense employees who agreed to cooperate once they understood what obstruction of a federal fraud investigation actually costs a person. Financial records subpoenaed from 4 different banks, and a forensic accounting summary that puts the total fraud, once Giselle's trust and 2 additional Rutherford Group shell entities are factored in, somewhere north of $41 million. It is, Renata tells me on a call I take standing on my own back porch at 11 at night, one of the cleaner cases her division has built in years. Not because the fraud is simple, but because the person who found it refused to let anyone rush her into a mistake. "You could have gone to a reporter with half of this a month ago," she says. Most people would have. Most people aren't trying to keep a 4-star general's supply chain intact while they do it, I say. I only get one shot at doing this the right way. I'd rather be slow and be right. There's a moment, about 3 weeks into the file building, that comes closer than I'd like to unraveling all of it. My father calls me on a Sunday, his voice warm in a way it hasn't been since before Silvermount, asking whether I've had time to think things over about the waiver. It's a test, I realize halfway through the call. Not a real olive branch. Just him checking whether the daughter he threatened has come to heal. I tell him I'm still processing everything, that I need more time, that I don't want to make a decision out of anger. He tells me that's the most sensible thing he's heard me say in years. And for one uncomfortable second, hearing him almost proud of me, I understand exactly why he's been so effective at making people believe whatever he needs them to believe. It's the same charm that convinced 2 banks and a defense contractor's compliance department to look the other way for 14 months. I hang up feeling like I need a shower. I bring the exchange to General Prescott the next morning, mostly because I want someone else's read on whether it means Harrison suspects anything. Prescott listens without interrupting, the way he listens to everything, then leans back in his chair. "He doesn't suspect you, Major. Men like your father don't imagine daughters as threats. That's not a flaw in your plan. That's the plan. He's not wrong. It's the same spot that let him call my badge a joke. In front of 23 people at a dinner in Aspen. The assumption that a woman who chose service over inheritance must be too small to matter. I've built an entire investigation on the strength of that assumption, and it hasn't failed me yet. By the time we sit down to plan the actual takedown, Prescott, Renata, and me, around a secure conference table with the Vanguard contract terms spread between us, the shape of it is already clear. Every Department of Defense logistics contract at Vanguard carries what's known as a morality and security clause, a provision that lets the base commander terminate any vendor agreement instantly if the vendor is found to have engaged in fraud, bribery, or a threat to installation security. Gavin's $450 million contract has that clause buried on page 112. He's never read that far. I have. The moment federal charges are filed, that clause becomes the mechanism that ends Harrington Defense's relationship with Vanguard in the time it takes me to sign a single form. The signing is scheduled for 9 o'clock the morning after the gala, Renata says, tapping the calendar on her laptop. That gives us a closing window of about 18 hours between the contract going live and the indictment going public. Move too early, and we spook them before the wires are secured. Move too late, and Harrington's already collecting on a live federal contract, which makes the unwinding messier for everyone, including the Pentagon. Then we move at the gate, I say, before the ink is even dry. Prescott looks at me for a long moment, the kind of look that isn't checking whether I'm capable, only confirming that I already know I am. Give the order when you're ready, Major. I'll have the Joint Chief's authorization waiting. The days leading up to the gala move differently than any other stretch of my career. I keep running Vanguard exactly as I always have. Morning briefings at 0700, gate rotations reviewed twice a day, a security posture nobody watching from the outside would ever guess is 36 hours from swallowing a defense contractor whole. But underneath the routine, everything narrows to a single date circled on a calendar only 3 people in the world can see. Renata's team finalizes the sealed indictment on a Wednesday, the paperwork thick enough that she has to carry it in a hard shell case instead of a folder. Prescott secures the Joint Chiefs' signature on a set of orders the same week, though he doesn't tell me what those orders say yet. He only tells me, cryptically, to make sure my dress uniform is pressed and ready before the weekend, and I'm too focused on the fraud case to ask him why. I don't tell Giselle anything. I think about it more than once, some sisterly instinct that wants to warn her, to get her and whatever's left of her trust fund away from the blast radius before it detonates. But Renata's right that any early movement risks the whole case, and my sister has spent her entire life being protected from consequences by people who love the idea of her more than the truth of her. For once, I decide, she's going to have to be protected by the truth instead. The night before the gala, I lay my dress blue uniform out on the bed in my government quarters, the one with the bronze star and the merit ribbons, the one I haven't worn since the ceremony where I earned the second of them. And I look at it for a long time before I hang it back in the closet. Still not sure yet whether I'll need it in the next 48 hours. Some part of me already knows I will. I just don't know yet how much of my life is about to change because of it. I call Renata one last time before I turn in, mostly to hear her confirm what I already know is true. Wires are traced, statements are sealed. Judge signed the warrants an hour ago, she says. The only variable left in this whole thing is your family, Olivia, and from what you've told me, they're not exactly known for restraint. She's right, and we both know it. Whatever happens at that gala tomorrow night, my father and Gavin are going to hand us the final piece themselves. Because men who have never once faced a consequence rarely know how to behave in the hours before one arrives. I sleep 4 hours that night, which is 3 more than I expect. I wake at 0530, run my usual perimeter checkout of habit rather than necessity, and spend the morning briefing my staff on a security posture change. I frame as routine, extra MP units on standby, an unscheduled readiness drill scheduled for the following morning. I choose my words carefully during that briefing, careful not to lie outright to people I'll need to trust me completely. Once the truth comes out, careful also not to hand anyone information that could travel further than it needs to before the indictment goes public. Nobody questions it. Nobody has any reason to. By the time I leave for the gala that evening, the machinery is already moving, quietly, exactly the way I built it to. If you're the kind of person who's ever wondered what it actually looks like to build a case the right way, not shouting from a rooftop, but brick by brick, quietly, exhaustingly, slower than anyone in a hurry for justice would ever like, this is exactly what it looks like. It's not unlike another story sitting on this channel right now. one where the turn comes from patience instead of confrontation. If you haven't watched that one yet, stay close, because between minutes 45 and 55 is where that story flips completely inside out. And I think once you see how it happens, you'll understand exactly why I keep coming back to telling these kinds of stories. By the second week of the following month, Renata's team has enough for a sealed federal indictment, ready to move the instant I give the signal. All that's left is timing, and my father, without knowing it, is about to hand me the exact moment I need. The Windsor Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in Tyson's Corner is lit gold that night, chandeliers reflecting off marble floors polished to a mirror shine, 300 guests in black tie circulating between defense contractors, retired generals, and the kind of beltway politicians who show up to these things because the open bar is better than the ones at their own fundraisers. Waitstaff move through the crowd with trays of champagne and small plates. Nobody's actually eating. And somewhere near the strings section, a jazz trio plays something low and unobtrusive, the kind of music designed to make expensive small talk sound more important than it is. My father and Gavin are holding court near the center of the room, champagne in hand, because Gavin has just received verbal confirmation from Harrington Defense's legal team that the Vanguard contract, $450 million, contract VG4471, the Sentinel Logistics Initiative, is cleared for final signature at 9 o'clock the next morning. I'm not there. I'm in my quiet hotel room 2 floors up, in civilian clothes for once, going over the final indictment language with Renata one more time over a secure line, when my phone buzzes with a photo message from Gavin. It's his Aston Martin, a Vanquish, sterling green, custom carbon fiber trim, the kind of car that costs more than most people's houses, parked illegally in the space reserved for General Prescott at the Vanguard main entrance. The message underneath reads, "I own the pavement you patrol, traffic girl. Tomorrow your father and I run this base." I look at the photo for a long moment. Then I do the only thing that makes sense to do with it. I save the screenshot directly into the evidence file Renata and I have been building for 2 months, time-stamped at 11:41 that night, and I write one line in the notes field. Exhibit added, unauthorized parking, reserved flag officer space, obstruction of base access. Harrington, G down in the ballroom, according to what I hear from the 2 Harrington employees who've already agreed to cooperate with Renata's office. My father spends the evening the way he spends most evenings when he thinks he's won something. Loudly, expansively, buying a round of champagne for a table of defense contractors, and telling anyone who'll listen that his daughter finally learned to stay out of his way. Gavin toasts to clean gates and quiet traffic girls, and the table laughs, because that's what tables full of powerful men do when one of their own makes a joke at someone's expense. Neither of them notices the base security liaison who slips out of the ballroom 20 minutes early, or thinks to wonder why. Later, Renata will tell me that at one point during the toasts, my father raised his glass to the family that never lets you down when it counts, and the entire table drank to it, Gavin's arm draped over the back of Giselle's chair, like a man posing for a portrait of everything he's about to lose. I try to picture it while I'm upstairs reviewing warrant language with a woman who spent 2 months of her life proving exactly how wrong that toast was, and I find I can picture it perfectly. I've had 11 years of practice picturing rooms my father is loud in. I don't sleep much that night, but not out of nerves. I've done everything I can do. Every wire is traced. Every statement is sealed under Renata's warrant. The Joint Chief's order sits in General Prescott's briefcase, ready to be read aloud the moment I give the word. All that's left is the drive back to Vanguard in the morning, and the 18-hour window Renata mapped out weeks ago, now down to single digits. At 6:52 the next morning, I stand in the Operations and Security Command Center in my dress blue uniform. The Bronze Star, the merit ribbons, everything I earned and none of it borrowed, and I give the order that puts Joint Base Vanguard on high security lockdown. Every gate, every checkpoint, no exceptions, and no advance warning to anyone outside the 3 people who already know why. The 40 minutes between that order and my father's convoy arriving at the front gate are the longest of the entire 2 months. I spend them the way I've spent most of the hard moments in my career. Not pacing, not checking my phone, just standing at the command center's central console, watching gate camera feeds cycle through their rotation, running the same mental checklist I've run before every major operation since my first deployment. Renata is already positioned in a secure conference room 2 buildings over, her team's phones live, ready to move the instant I give the word. General Prescott arrives at 6:41, in full dress uniform himself, and takes up a position beside me without a word, the two of us watching the same monitors in a silence that says everything neither of us needs to say out loud. "Nervous, Messenger?" he asks eventually, not unkindly. "No, sir," I say, and mean it. "I've had 2 months to get nervous. This morning I'm just ready." He almost smiles. 40 minutes later, my father's convoy arrives at the front gate, expecting a red carpet escort to a signing ceremony that will never happen. The main gate at Joint Base Vanguard is a fortress by design. Biometric scanners, reinforced barriers, soldiers in tactical gear trained to treat every unscheduled arrival as a potential threat until proven otherwise. Under a crisp gray morning sky, my father's convoy pulls up in a custom Bentley, trailed by Gavin's Aston Martin, both vehicles polished to a shine that makes them look absurdly out of place against the base's utilitarian gray concrete. They expect the gate to open. Instead, they find it blocked by a line of armored MP vehicles and soldiers holding position, rifles slung but present, the kind of formation that tells anyone paying attention this isn't a routine morning. My father rolls down his window, flashing a set of retired credentials that haven't carried operational weight in over a decade, shouting at the young corporal standing closest to the barrier. "Do you know who I am? I am Harrison Rutherford. Open this gate immediately, or I'll have your badge by noon." Corporal Nathaniel Boyd, 24 years old, 6 months into this posting, the kind of soldier who's been trained to hold a line regardless of whose name gets shouted at him, doesn't flinch. "The base is on high security lockdown by order of the Provost Marshal, sir. Step out of the vehicle." He says it's the same way he'd say it to anyone, no deference, no hesitation, exactly the way I trained every gate crew on this base to say it. I'll find out later, from the after-action report, that Boyd had recognized my father's name from the visitor manifest, the moment the Bentley pulled up, and made a conscious decision not to let that recognition change a single word of his posture. It's a small thing, in the middle of everything else that happens that morning, but it's the kind of small thing that tells me I put the right people on that gate. I hear about it secondhand at first, watching the gate camera feed from the command center, my father's face reddening through the windshield in real time. Gavin gets out of his own car, still in yesterday's tuxedo shirt with the bow tie hanging loose around his neck, and I watch him march up to the barrier with the kind of confidence that's never once been tested against an actual chain of command. "This is insane," Gavin says, loud enough that the audio feed catches it clearly. "I have a signing at 9, $450 million, and some corporal is going to hold me up because of a drill?" "It's not a drill, sir," Boyd says. My father, red-faced now, storms toward the barrier himself, Giselle trailing behind him in the back seat of the Bentley, phone in hand, clearly texting someone, likely, I'll learn later, trying to reach me directly, unaware I'm the reason the gate isn't opening. "I want to see General Prescott," my father shouts. "Right now. This is insubordination. This is going to cost people their careers." I can radio a request up the chain. "Sir," Boyd says, unmoved, "but the base remains under lockdown until the Provost Marshal lifts the order." That's not something I have authority to change, and it's not something shouting at me is going to change either. My father stares at him, like he's speaking a foreign language. A 24-year-old corporal calmly informing a man worth tens of millions of dollars that his money means nothing at this particular gate. It's a look I recognize immediately, because I spent most of my childhood on the receiving end of a version of it, the specific disbelief of a man who's never once been told no by someone with less money than him. I watch his composure, the same aristocratic ease he wore across a dinner table in Aspen, calling my badge a joke, curdle in real time into something closer to panic, though he doesn't recognize it as panic yet. He still believes this is a misunderstanding he can shout his way out of. He spent his entire life discovering that a loud enough voice, aimed at the right person, tends to bend circumstances back into his favor. A hostess table at a fully booked restaurant, a permit fast-tracked through a city office, a daughter's badge dismissed as a joke at his own dinner table. It's worked for him for 61 years. It has never once worked on a United States Army checkpoint. And it isn't going to start this morning. He has no idea that the gate isn't malfunctioning. The gate is working exactly the way I designed it to. They're escorted in eventually, though not the way they expected. Armed MPs walk my father, Gavin, and a visibly panicking Giselle through the base's front security checkpoint and into the command atrium. 3 stories of glass and steel, the same building where I've spent the last 2 months quietly assembling the case that's about to end their morning. My father doesn't lower his voice as they walk. He demands to see General Prescott, calling it insubordination, calling it civic disrespect, calling it, at one particularly loud point, echoing off the atrium's glass walls, the kind of incompetence that gets people fired in the real world. Gavin threatens to pull Harrington Defense's entire logistics software support, insisting the base will collapse without his technology running its supply chain, a claim that would carry more weight if I hadn't spent the last 6 weeks quietly building a contingency plan with a competing vendor precisely because I never trusted his company's access to begin with. You have no idea what you're doing, Gavin says at one point, to no MP in particular, his voice cracking slightly on the word idea. Do you understand what happens to a military installation that loses its primary logistics contractor overnight? Do you understand what that costs? None of the soldiers escorting him answer. It isn't their job to answer him, and more importantly, none of them yet know that the answer is already sitting in a folder under my arm 2 floors above their heads. What neither of them notices, standing in the center of that atrium shouting up at officers who won't answer them, is the row of faces watching from the balconies above. Base executives, senior officers, a scattering of contractors who arrived early for a different meeting entirely and now stand frozen at the railing, watching a man in a wrinkled suit threaten a United States Army installation at 7 in the morning. The silence from those balconies is total. Not the polite silence of people minding their own business, but the specific, suffocating silence of people watching someone humiliate themselves in real time and not yet understanding why. Giselle has stopped texting. She's standing a few feet from our father, her wedding week glow completely gone, staring at the soldiers surrounding them like she's only now grasping that whatever this is, it's real. I feel something for her in that moment, not sympathy for our father, never that, but a flicker of grief for the sister who's about to learn, in the worst possible way, exactly what kind of business her fiancé and her father have actually been running. I watch from a monitor 2 floors up as my father paces the atrium floor, his reflection multiplying across the glass walls surrounding him. A man used to commanding rooms suddenly aware that this particular room has no interest in being commanded. Giselle sits down on one of the atrium's low marble benches, her knees together, her hands folded the way our mother used to fold hers at church, a habit I didn't know she still had until this exact moment. It's a small human detail in the middle of all this, my sister remembering, without realizing it, a version of herself from before any of us learned what our father's money actually cost. The heavy biometric doors at the far end of the atrium hum, then begin to slide open. I walk out beneath the American and Joint Force flags hanging from the atrium's upper level, not in field gear this time but in my dress blue uniform. The bronze star catching the overhead light, merit ribbons lined in perfect order above my nameplate. I haven't worn this uniform since the ceremony where I earned the second of them. I wear it now because some moments deserve to be met in exactly the clothes that prove who you actually are, instead of who someone decided you'd be at a dinner table 11 months ago. My father sees me first, and for half a second, something like relief crosses his face. His daughter, finally here to fix this embarrassing misunderstanding. It doesn't last. There she is, he says, pointing at me across the atrium floor, his voice bouncing off glass. General Prescott, fire this traffic cop. She blocked our entry and embarrassed our entire family in front of these people. General Alistair Prescott steps out from behind me, 4 stars catching the light, his voice carrying across the atrium without needing to be raised. Colonel Rutherford, you are severely mistaken. The room goes still in a different way now. Not the suffocating silence from the balconies earlier, but the specific attention of people who recognize a 4-star general is about to say something that matters. Even the soldiers, stationed along the atrium's perimeter, shift their posture slightly, the collective attention of the room bending toward Prescott, the way a room only bends for someone whose authority has never once needed to be tested. Major Olivia Rutherford is not traffic duty, Prescott continues. By order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, effective as of this morning, she has been promoted to Base Commander of Joint Base Vanguard. She holds absolute sovereign authority over this entire installation. He pauses, letting that land fully before he finishes. And she is the one who decides the fate of your contracts, Mr. Harrington. Not the other way around. I watched the color drain out of my father's face in real time, not gradually, the way a person accepts bad news, but all at once. The way ice cracks under weight it was never built to hold. His mouth opens. Nothing comes out. Beside him, Gavin's confident posture collapses into something smaller, his eyes darting between Prescott and me like he's trying to find the version of this morning, where his $450 million contract still exists. Giselle makes a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and grips the strap of her handbag like it's the only solid thing left in the room. My father finds his voice eventually, though it comes out thinner than the one that shouted at Corporal Boyd 40 minutes ago. This is a mistake, Olivia. Tell them this is a mistake. I look at him. The way I looked at him across that dinner table in Aspen, calm, unhurried, and entirely without the anger he clearly expects. Somewhere behind me, I hear a faint ripple of movement along the upper balconies. Officers straightening. A low murmur passing between two colonels, who clearly recognize what they just watched happen, even if my father hasn't caught up yet. 11 years of being underestimated in rooms, exactly like this one, have taught me that the moment somebody finally sees you clearly, they rarely see you gently. I've made my peace with that a long time ago. It's not a mistake, Father, I say. It's an audit. Prescott doesn't waste the moment. He nods to two MPs stationed near the atrium's east doors, and within minutes, my father, Gavin, and Giselle are escorted. Not arrested yet, just escorted, the distinction still mattering for another few minutes, out through the command atrium and onto the sunlit tarmac beyond it, where transport planes and helicopters sit lined up in perfect military precision, engines idle, ground crews pausing their work to watch three civilians in formal wear-walk across the tarmac flanked by armed soldiers. I follow at my own pace, not rushing, because I've waited 2 months for this, and I intend to do it exactly right. Renata is already there when I arrive, stepping off a government sedan with 2 other FBI agents, and a driver who parks close enough to the tarmac's edge that nobody watching could mistake this for anything other than what it is. I carry a thick, leather-bound folder under one arm, the physical copy of everything Renata's office has built, printed and bound because some moments deserve paper instead of a screen. My father watches me approach with something close to desperation now, the anger from the gate long gone, replaced by the particular fear of a man realizing the walls closing in are ones he built himself. One shell company at a time. Olivia, he says, quieter now, almost pleading, whatever this is, whatever you think you found, we can fix this as a family. Just talk to me. I open the folder instead of answering him. Directly, flipping past the cover page to the summary Renata and I finalized together 2 nights earlier. Harrison Rutherford, I say, my voice level, carrying easily across the quiet tarmac. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit defense contract fraud, wire fraud in excess of $41 million, bribery of public officials, identity theft in connection with the incorporation of Falcon Ridge Sourcing LLC, and corporate espionage related to unauthorized access of classified logistics data at Joint Base Vanguard. His face goes the color of the concrete beneath his shoes. Gavin Harrington, I continue, turning the page. You are charged as a co-conspirator in the same fraud, along with obstruction of a federal investigation and violation of Department of Defense procurement integrity statutes. Gavin doesn't say anything at all. He just stares at the folder like he's trying to will the words off the page through sheer disbelief. I close the folder and hand it to Renata, then turn to the tablet one of my staff officers hands me. The formal contract termination interface, already logged into Vanguard's procurement system, contract VG4471 pulled up and ready. By authority as base commander of Joint Base Vanguard, I say I am activating the morality and security clause of contract VG4471, effective immediately. I enter my authorization code. The screen refreshes, a single line of red text confirming what $450 million just became. To terminated, for cause. Rutherford Group's operating logistics licenses are frozen pending investigation. Effective as of the morning, I add. You'll be hearing from the Department of Defense's Office of Inspector General within the week. Renata's agents step forward. The cold, heavy metallic click of handcuffs closing around Gavin's wrists is the loudest sound on the tarmac for a full second. My father's follow half a beat later. For a moment, nobody on that tarmac moves at all. A ground crew member near the nearest helicopter has stopped mid-task, a fuel line still in his hands, watching the scene unfold with the particular stillness of someone who knows they're witnessing something they'll be asked to describe later. One of Renata's junior agents reads my father his rights in a flat, procedural voice, the words landing on him like something out of a courtroom drama he never imagined starring in himself. He doesn't fight it. Whatever fight was in him emptied out somewhere between the gate and this tarmac, replaced by the particular exhaustion of a man who's finally run out of rooms he can talk his way out of. Giselle screams, a short, cracked sound, more shock than grief, and her designer bag hits the concrete, spilling lipstick and a phone case across the tarmac as she realizes, in real time, exactly how much of her life just ended with 2 clicks of steel. She doesn't get arrested. There's no evidence she ever knew what her father and fiancé were doing. And I made certain of that myself 3 separate times before I ever brought this case to Renata. But watching her collapse to her knees on the tarmac, watching the empire she thought she was marrying into turn to worthless ash in front of her, I understand that some kinds of loss don't require handcuffs to be devastating. I crouch down next to her for a moment, close enough that only she can hear me, ignoring the agents and the cameras and my own father's stare. Breathe, I tell her. You're not part of this. I made sure of that. You're going to be okay. She doesn't answer, just grips my forearm hard enough to leave marks, and for one unguarded second, she looks exactly like the 8-year-old who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, before either of us learned what our last name was supposed to mean. My father looks at me one last time as the agents begin walking him toward the sedan, his voice breaking in a way I've genuinely never heard it break before, not even at my mother's funeral. Olivia, please. We are family. I look him dead in the eye, everything in me that spent 11 years wanting him to see me. Not the badge, not the rank, just me, settles into something quieter and more permanent than anger. Family is built on respect, Father, I say. You treated my dignity like traffic duty. Now enjoy the natural consequences of your own crooked foundation. I don't wait to watch them load into the sedan. I turn my back on their weeping, furious, unraveling forms and walk toward the helipad at the far end of the tarmac, where a transport helicopter waits with its rotors already beginning to turn. The fallout moves faster than even Renata predicted. Within 72 hours, 3 other defense contractors who'd been quietly courting Harrington Defense sever ties publicly, unwilling to be anywhere near a federal fraud indictment involving $41 million and a name as recognizable as Rutherford. Rutherford Group stock, privately held, but still tracked by every real estate and logistics analyst on the East Coast, becomes effectively worthless within the month, its remaining assets frozen under a court order, while the Office of Inspector General finishes untangling every shell company Harrison ever touched. Falcon Ridge sourcing dissolves. The Delaware entity dissolves. Even the $20 million Palm Beach estate, the one my father slid across a dinner table in a velvet box, the one that started this entire story, without either of us realizing it, gets seized as part of asset forfeiture proceedings before Giselle ever gets the chance to pick out furniture for it. A financial journalist from a mid-sized trade publication calls my office twice that first week, asking whether I'd be willing to comment on record about bringing down my own father's company. I decline both times, and ask my public affairs officer to decline every request after that as well. This was never a story I wanted told from a podium. It was an audit that happened to involve my last name, and I intend to let the court records speak for themselves instead of my own voice speaking for the cameras. Gavin's case moves through arraignment within 2 weeks. His attorneys try, briefly, to argue he was unaware of the fraud his own company was committing, an argument that collapses the moment Renata's team produces the sworn statements from 2 Harrington Defense employees confirming he personally approved the backdated manifests. Harrington Defense's board removes him from his vice president role within days of the arraignment, replacing him with a compliance officer, whose entire job, ironically, becomes untangling the exact kind of fraud Gavin spent years enabling. The $450 million contract that once made him feel untouchable becomes, in the final tally Renata's office prepares for sentencing, a single line item in a case that costs him considerably more than any deal ever would have earned him. He takes a plea deal eventually, 11 years reduced to 6 with cooperation, though by the time it's finalized, Giselle has already filed to end the engagement, quietly, without a single interview, without a single word to the reporters who spend a full news cycle trying to reach her. I don't hear from her for 2 months after the tarmac. When she finally calls, it's late on a Tuesday, and her voice sounds younger than I've heard it since we were kids. I didn't know, she says, before I can say anything at all. I need you to believe that I didn't know. I already know you didn't, I tell her. I checked 3 times before I ever let this go to the FBI. You're not part of what he did. She's quiet for a long moment. Everyone keeps calling me a victim. I don't feel like one. I feel like someone who spent 26 years not asking a single question about where any of it came from. That's not nothing to sit with, I say. But it's not the same as guilt, Giselle. Don't let him take that from you too. She's quiet again, longer this time, and I can hear something shift in her breathing on the other end of the line. The sound of someone deciding whether to say the next thing out loud. I used to think you were the cold one, she finally says. The one who didn't need us. I think I just never noticed how much you were carrying by yourself, because nobody ever asked you to put it down where the rest of us could see it. I don't have a quick answer for that one. It sits between us for a moment, honest in a way very little in this family has ever been. She asks me, near the end of that first call, whether I hate her for not noticing sooner, for the 26 years of velvet boxes and waterfront, estates she took without ever once asking where the money actually came from. I think about it honestly before I answer, because she deserves an honest answer more than a comforting one. I don't hate you, I tell her. I spent most of my life angry that you got to be the daughter who never had to ask questions. I'm starting to understand now that not asking questions was its own kind of cage. You just didn't know you were in one. She's renting a small apartment in Charlotte now, working an entry-level job at a logistics firm. An honest one, she tells me. One she found herself, without a single Rutherford name attached to the application. We talk more now than we ever did growing up. It's a strange kind of gift, buried inside everything else that broke that year. My father's trial is still 18 months out. By the time I'm writing any of this down in my own head, the wheels of federal prosecution turning at their own unhurried pace. He's out on a modest bail, his remaining unfrozen assets barely cover, restricted to the county, forbidden from contacting anyone connected to Vanguard, myself included, except through counsel. For 4 months, that restriction holds. Then, on a Thursday in late spring, a letter arrives at my Vanguard office with no return address, forwarded through his attorney, because he isn't permitted to send it any other way. It isn't long. My father was never a man of long letters, but it's the first thing he's ever written to me that doesn't sound like it's measuring my worth against a spreadsheet. I keep thinking about the dinner in Aspen, he writes. I keep thinking about how easy it was for me to say what I said, in front of all those people, like your whole life was a punchline I got to write. I spent 30 years building a company on the idea that value only comes from what you can put a number on. I put a number on my own daughter without ever once asking what she actually did for a living, and it turns out the thing I dismissed as traffic duty was the only honest thing left in this family. I don't expect you to answer this. I just needed you to know I finally understand what I lost. And it wasn't the company. There's a second paragraph, shorter, that I almost don't include in my own memory of that letter because it's harder to sit with than the first. Your mother used to say I'd figure out what mattered once it was too late to do anything about it. I used to tell her she was being dramatic. I'd give a great deal to be able to tell her she was right and to thank her for it. Instead of just telling you, I read it twice, standing at my office window overlooking the tarmac, where I read him his charges 18 months earlier. I don't write back, not yet. Some things need more time than a single letter can hold. But I fold it carefully and put it in the drawer where I keep the few things from this family that are actually worth keeping. Joint Base Vanguard runs cleaner now than it has in a decade, and not just because of the fraud case that made headlines nobody at that dinner table ever expected to generate. The formal change of command ceremony happens 3 weeks after the tarmac, on a parade field lined with soldiers standing in perfect formation, despite a wind sharp enough to make the flags snap overhead like gunfire. General Prescott presides personally, reading the Joint Chief's order aloud in full this time. No interruptions, no furious father shouting from the sidelines. Just 12,000 personnel's worth of command authority passed formally into my hands in front of everyone who'll actually serve under it. I salute him. He returns it, then breaks protocol just slightly, leaning in before he steps back to say something only I can hear. Your mother would have been unbearable about this, Major. In the best possible way. I don't know how he knew about my mother or what she would have thought, but something about the certainty in his voice tells me he's not guessing. I hold the salute a half-second longer than regulation requires, and if anyone in that formation notices, nobody says a word about it. I promoted Corporal Boyd to sergeant myself, 3 months after he held that gate against a furious with a famous last name and didn't budge an inch. I sit in on every contract review personally now, a habit some of my staff think is excessive, and I think is simply the job done right. Renata and I still talk most weeks, mostly about work, sometimes about nothing at all, the particular friendship that survives building a federal case together. Some mornings, walking the flight line before the base wakes up, I still think about that dinner table in Aspen, the velvet box, the firelight on my father's cufflinks, the particular silence of a room deciding whether to laugh at me or with him. I don't think about it with anger anymore. I think about it the way you think about a wound that's finished healing, aware of exactly where it used to hurt, without the hurt itself following you anymore. I think, too, about the version of that night where I said something sharper back to him instead of picking up my water glass. The version some of you probably wanted, watching me sit there and take it. I've turned that version over more than once, wondering if it would have felt better in the moment. It probably would have. But it wouldn't have built the case that actually mattered. And it wouldn't have taught me the thing I needed to learn most, which is that the loudest room doesn't always belong to the loudest voice in it. Sometimes it belongs to the person who's willing to wait, watch, and let the truth do the talking when it's ready. My mother used to tell me that dignity was the one inheritance nobody could write you out of, no matter how many velvet boxes got passed around a dinner table. I didn't understand her at the time. I understand her now, standing on a runway that answers to me, wearing a badge that turned out to be worth more than every deed my father ever signed. He spent his whole life measuring people by what they could be worth to him. I spent mine learning that the only worth that actually holds is the kind you build yourself, quietly, one honest audit at a time, long before anyone else is paying attention. That's the whole inheritance, as far as I can tell. It was never in a velvet box to begin with. If you've made it this far, there's another story waiting on this channel that I think you're going to want to see next. It's sitting right there on your screen, one of the ones people come back to watch more than once. And if tonight taught you anything about patience paying off, that one will too.